So imagine waking up tomorrow, right? And you realize that doing everything perfectly, like paying your mortgage on time, getting that corporate promotion, putting a little away for retirement.
The whole, the standard checklist.
Right. But doing all of that somehow still mathematically guarantees that you will go bankrupt within the next decade.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a terrifying thought.
It really is. But that is the actual structural reality proposed by the material we're jumping into today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Wait to be here.
Today, we're mapping out the architecture of this massive new framework. It's a 10-part article series titled The 99% Perspective, a Blueprint for Economic Justice. And it's basically this incredibly comprehensive attempt to explain a systemic collapse in the modern economy.
Yeah, and I should say right up front, this framework does not pull any punches. I mean, it covers a vast amount of ground.
It really does.
And it weaves together some highly debated, intensely politically charged concepts. We are looking at arguments involving macro-level war spending, sweeping wealth inequality, the reversal of diversity initiatives, and, of course, the rapid deployment of artificial intelligence.
Right, which means we need to set some ground rules for you listening right at the top. Because the concepts in this source material, they hit on major ideological fault lines.
Oh, absolutely.
So our goal today is absolutely not to endorse either side of the political spectrum on these issues. We aren't here to argue for or against the author's specific political stances or, their policy demands.
Right, we're just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our mission is strictly analytical. We're acting as impartial guides to help you objectively map out the architecture of this blueprint. We just want to understand the underlying logic of the author's arguments, explore the economic mechanisms they describe.
And see how they connect all these massive, seemingly unrelated global events.
Thanks.
And the foundational logic of this entire blueprint, it really rests on a simple but kind of radical premise.
Which is?
That you can no longer analyze economic problems in isolation. You can't just look at inflation or housing or the job market as these separate silos anymore.
Right.
The author argues that today's crisis is defined by simultaneous compounding pressures just crashing into the system all at once. And the overarching question they pose right in the introduction isn't the traditional metric, is the economy growing?
So what does this all mean? What are they asking instead?
The question they demand we ask is, who is this economy actually growing for?
Right. Because, if you just look at a spreadsheet, GDP is technically up.
Sure. The stock market is hitting record highs.
Exactly. But then the author provides this dizzying list of pressures that suggest the foundation is, kind of rotting from underneath. They list out chronic inflation, crippling housing shortages, technological job displacement, soaring consumer debt.
Small business bankruptcies.
Yes, and massive geopolitical spending. Hearing all of that listed out at once, it makes me think of the medical concept of a comorbidity, but on a macroeconomic scale.
A comorbidity, right, like compounding ailments making the whole body fail. How does that translate to the economic mechanisms the author is outlining, though?
Well, think about a patient in an ICU, right? If you just have a broken leg, the treatment is pretty straightforward. You put a cast on it, you let it heal.
Right, simple.
But if that patient has a severe respiratory infection and skyrocketing blood pressure, a compromised immune system, and then they break their leg.
The presence of all those other ailments, the comorbidities, it makes recovery almost impossible.
Exactly. And more importantly, the treatments start to conflict with each other. If you give them medication to fix the blood pressure, it might completely destroy their kidneys.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, so the blueprint seems to be arguing that treating inflation with high interest rates is destroying small businesses and the housing market because the system is already just too sick to handle the medicine.
That analogy tracks perfectly, actually, with how the author connects macro-level policy to micro-level suffering. Because if you look at part 2 of the series...
One on government and war spending, right?
Exactly. The blueprint argues that traditional economists often fail because they treat the federal budget and the household budget as existing in two entirely separate universes.
They don't affect each other.
Right. But this framework forces them together. The author draws a direct causal line between massive government deficit spending on global military conflicts and the collapse of local Main Street economies.
Okay, but what is the actual mechanism there? How does a geopolitical military budget, a notion away, actively cannibalize the capital that a local bakery or a neighborhood hardware store relies on?
It all comes down to inflation and the cost of capital.
Okay.
The author's logic flows kind of like this. When a government engages in massive deficit spending to fund global operations, it injects trillions of dollars into the macroeconomy.
Right, which drives up inflation.
Exactly. Deficit spending is a massive driver of inflation. So to fight that inflation, the central bank has to aggressively hike interest rates.
The medicine that hurts the patient.
Right. Now, follow that higher interest rate down to the micro level, that neighborhood bakery you mentioned. It operates on really thin margins. It relies on short-term loans to buy a new oven or just manage payroll during a slow month.
Right.
Suddenly, because of those macro rate hikes, the cost of that loan doubles. The bakery can't absorb a 9% interest rate the way a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor can.
Oh, wow.
So the macro policy designed to fund a global objective directly starves the local business of the capital it needs to survive.
So the deficit spending basically acts like a vacuum. It just sucks all the affordable liquidity right out of the room, leaving the small businesses gasping for air.
That's the argument, yeah.
Which forces a very specific perspective on who is actually paying the price for these macro policies. If those are the systemic comorbidities weighing everything down, who does the blueprint identify as bearing the brunt of the weight? Because, I mean, the 99% is a catchy slogan, but it's a pretty ambiguous demographic.
It is, but the source material is actually highly specific about who constitutes this vulnerable coalition. They point to working families fighting wage stagnation, Black households facing unique employment cliffs.
Renters dealing with predatory pricing?
Yes. Homeowners trapped by rising costs, and local small businesses fighting for survival.
Which is just a massive, incredibly diverse umbrella of people.
It is.
And the blueprint gets really granular about how these different groups face unique but overlapping crises. Like, one concept that really jumped out to me is how the author frames the modern employment landscape for historically marginalized groups.
Ah, yes, in part 4.
Right. They outline what they call the Black jobs crisis.
Yeah.
And the mechanism they describe there is fascinating because they link two phenomena that you rarely hear discussed in the same breath.
The rollback of DEI and the rise of AI.
Exactly. The widespread rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs colliding with the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. And they call the collision of these two things the new economic exclusion.
And that collision represents a huge structural double whammy for the middle class. We should probably look at the mechanics of why the author pairs them together like that.
Let's do it.
Because over the last few decades, DEI initiatives, whether you agree with them politically or not, they functioned as institutional frameworks.
Right.
They were structural ladders designed to open doors into middle management and corporate roles for Black professionals and other marginalized groups who had historically just been locked out of those specific wealth-building tiers.
But then, at the exact moment those institutional ladders are being dismantled by policy changes and court rulings, the technological floor is dropping out.
That is the core of the argument right there. AI displacement threatens to eliminate millions of jobs by automating cognitive labor.
Yeah.
And what kind of labor is an algorithm most likely to replace first? It's entry-level corporate work.
Junior analysts.
Exactly. Middle management, data processing, spreadsheet work, those are the exact roles that typically serve as the entry point into the middle class.
The same roles those institutional diversity programs were focused on protecting and providing access to.
You got it.
So the blueprint is suggesting that it's not just a tough job market. It's that the policy mechanisms designed to ensure equitable access are being actively retracted right as a technological revolution is wiping out the very jobs people were trying to access in the first place.
It's a synchronized locking of the gates.
Yeah, I can follow the logic there.
Yeah.
But I do have to push back hard on another aspect of this coalition the author builds.
Okay, what's that?
I'm looking at this grouping of renters, homeowners, and small business owners. I have a really hard time buying that grouping.
Why combining them seems strange.
Yeah. I mean, why combine them into one demographic struggle? A small business owner is technically managing capital. They own an LLC, they hire people.
Sure.
A renter is handing over half their paycheck to a landlord and owns absolutely nothing. Lumping them together just feels like an academic stretch to manufacture this unified, romanticized 99% coalition. Like, how does the blueprint possibly reconcile the massive wealth and class gap between a business owner and a tenant?
It's definitely the right question to ask. Because on a traditional economic axis, the small business owner is the capitalist and the renter is the laborer, right?
Exactly.
But the author reconciles this by completely redefining the modern battle lines. The blueprint focuses heavily on the fight for contracts and capital.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
It argues that in today's hyper-consolidated economy, a local business owner with, say, $1 million in revenue is functionally closer to a paycheck-to-paycheck renter than they are to a massive multinational corporation.
Because the scale of wealth at the very top has just distorted the game entirely.
Exactly. Think of it like a game of Monopoly that has been going on for 5 hours.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. All the properties on the board have already been bought up by one or two players who have massive stacks of cash and hotels on every single square.
Right, the board is locked up.
In that scenario, it doesn't really matter if you are the player who owns a single railroad or the player who owns absolutely nothing and is just trying to survive the next roll of the dice.
Oh, I see.
Because both of you are just transferring what little cash you have left to the single player who owns the whole board. The author argues that institutional investors in multinational monopolies have consolidated so much capital that the local bakery owner and the apartment renter are now in the exact same precarious boat.
Wow.
They are both just trying to survive the upward vacuum of wealth.
The local business gets squeezed by corporate monopolies, undercutting their prices and buying off their suppliers. And the renter gets squeezed by corporate landlords jacking up the rent.
Exactly. They are both victims of the same consolidation.
Okay, let's unpack this further. Because that idea of being endlessly squeezed brings us perfectly to the physical and financial traps the series outlines in Part 3. The author is very deliberate in exploring the mechanisms of how people are trapped, specifically in the housing market.
Yes.
And there is a fascinating nuance in their argument here. They don't just point out the obvious fact that buying a home is difficult. Everyone knows that.
Right.
They explicitly argue that buying, renting, and keeping a home are all becoming harder.
That single word keeping, it shifts the entire paradigm of the housing conversation.
It really does, because normally the economic narrative is binary.
Right.
We talk about a buyer's crisis where high interest rates and hedge funds buying up single-family homes lock young people out of building equity. Or we talk about a renter's crisis where the monthly rent outpaces wage growth by double digits.
Right, but by focusing on keeping a home, the author argues that even the people who theoretically won the American dream, the people who successfully bought a house 10 years ago, are still trapped.
Wait, how are they trapped if they already own it?
Because the underlying costs associated with maintaining that shelter have detached from local wages.
Like property taxes.
Exactly. We're talking about property taxes spiking because institutional investors have artificially driven up neighborhood valuations. We're talking about home insurance premiums doubling or even tripling in a single year due to climate risks and corporate price gouging.
Wait, that is a brutal mechanism to unpack.
Yeah.
So if an out-of-state private equity firm buys 5 houses on your street at a 20% premium just to turn them into rentals,
Yep.
your neighborhood's comparable value shoots up, which sounds great on paper. Until the county assesses your home at that new artificial value, your property taxes skyrocket, and suddenly a grandmother on a fixed pension is literally priced out of her own living room.
What's fascinating here is how that leads directly to the next structural failure the blueprint identifies in parts 5 and 7, which is the collapse of the financial safety net.
Oh, right.
And it explains the reality of why working families consistently report feeling broke, even when macroeconomic indicators say they shouldn't.
Right. The author links the cost of living crisis directly to consumer debt and bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And they tackle a very pervasive cultural narrative here, which I think is super interesting.
The individualism aspect.
Exactly. For decades, the dominant cultural ethos in America has been hyper-individualism regarding finances. Like, if you are struggling, if you have a rolling balance on a high-interest credit card, if you're facing bankruptcy, the immediate cultural assumption is that you are just bad at budgeting.
Right. You bought too much avocado toast.
Exactly. You bought a car you couldn't afford, you lack personal responsibility.
But the author aggressively rejects that premise as a manufactured myth, basically designed to hide systemic failure.
How so?
Well, when the basic non-negotiable costs of survival, keeping a roof over your head, paying for health insurance, buying groceries, when those vastly outpace median wage growth, debt ceases to be a consequence of frivolous spending.
It's just survival.
Right. The blueprint argues that for the 99%, taking on high-interest credit card debt has become a structural, systemic requirement just to bridge the delta between stagnant wages and the exploding cost of basic survival.
Wow.
The institutional safety net hasn't just frayed, it has vanished. And predatory debt has taken its place.
So debt isn't a personal failing. It's literally the only safety net left. That is incredibly bleak.
It is.
And if the present moment is defined by these inescapable housing and debt traps, how does this framework view the immediate future? Because nothing we've discussed so far suggests these compounding pressures are going to naturally, self-correct.
Well, they won't self-correct. In fact, the author views the immediate future through the lens of a massive, unprecedented accelerant of inequality, the integration of artificial intelligence into the labor market.
Part 8.
Right. And they frame their analysis of automation with a very stark zero-sum dichotomy. They basically ask, who gets replaced and who gets rich?
There is zero ambiguity in that framing. And it stands in such sharp contrast to the way we usually talk about technology. Like, the standard Silicon Valley narrative is always inherently optimistic.
Sure, changing the world for the better.
Exactly. The internet, smartphones, cloud computing, they're heavily marketed as neutral tools that democratize information, lower barriers to entry, create entirely new industries for everyone.
Right.
But this blueprint treats that optimism as a dangerous illusion. It positions artificial intelligence not as a democratizing tool, but as the ultimate wealth gap multiplier.
Because AI fundamentally breaks the 20th century social contract between labor and capital.
How does it break it?
Well, think about it. For the last 100 years, even the most cutthroat corporations still needed human labor to generate profit. They needed humans to pull levers on an assembly line, write code, analyze data, manage logistics.
There was a mutual dependency.
Exactly. A mutual, albeit unequal, dependency. But AI represents the decoupling of productivity from human labor. If an algorithm can mimic cognitive labor at a fraction of a cent per compute cycle, that mutual dependency just evaporates.
Right. If I'm, say, a mid-level graphic designer, my marginal cost of living means I have to charge $60,000 a year just to pay rent and eat.
Yep.
But an enterprise AI model can generate the same marketing assets for pennies.
Mm-hmm.
I literally cannot compete with a machine that has a marginal cost of zero.
Nobody can.
So if you own the AI infrastructure, your profit margins become infinite, you get rich.
Right.
If your labor can be replicated by it, your value drops to zero. You get replaced.
Which is why the author argues that this AI anxiety fundamentally alters the endgame for the working class. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this leads to what is arguably the most philosophically profound concept in the entire blueprint: the redefinition of the American dream in Part 9.
The new American dream.
Right. The author argues that the old American dream is mathematically dead. Yes. Treating your physical or intellectual labor for a reliable corporate salary, a pension, and a house in the suburbs, it's no longer a viable strategy for economic independence because labor itself is being rapidly devalued by automation.
Okay, so if selling your time is a guaranteed losing game in the age of AI, what does the blueprint say the new game is? I mean, how do you survive?
Hard assets, ownership, land.
Really?
The author argues that in an economy where software eats cognitive labor, the only true hedge against obsolescence is owning the physical infrastructure of reality: land, equity, tangible capital.
Wow.
The framework concludes that without actual unencumbered ownership, true economic independence is impossible. You cannot labor your way to safety anymore. You have to own the board.
Like the Monopoly game.
Exactly like the Monopoly game.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. It takes everything we are taught about working hard to climb the ladder and just throws it out the window.
Pretty much.
So taking a step back, looking at this massive architecture, from the comorbidities of war spending and inflation, the collision of DEI rollbacks and AI, the traps of housing and debt, to the death of labor-based wealth. What is the author's ultimate purpose here?
Well,
Because diagnosing a terminal illness without offering a cure is just a recipe for despair, right?
it is. And to understand the purpose, we have to look at the historical context the author uses to bracket the entire series in Part 1.
The Occupy Wall Street connection.
Right. They explicitly trace the origins of this current crisis back to 2011 to the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know, the encampments, the initial popularization of the 99% versus the 1% rhetoric.
Right, but I mean, a massive critique of Occupy Wall Street at the time was that while it was brilliant at identifying the disease-like runaway wealth inequality and corporate greed, it utterly failed to articulate a unified list of demands.
It lacked focus.
Yeah, it was a protest without a policy wing.
Exactly, and the author acknowledges that history. They frame the current moment by saying it is a different crisis, but the exact same core problem of the economy failing the majority.
Right.
However, the synthesis of this new project is fundamentally different from the protests of 2011. The author doesn't just end on a diagnosis of systemic failure, they explicitly position this work as a blueprint.
And a blueprint is a technical drawing. It's actionable.
Yes, it is a strategic document. The final sections of the framework, specifically Part 10, pivot entirely from diagnosing the crisis to outlining what the 99% can actually do next.
Oh, wow.
It is an attempt to build a bridge from historical, unstructured grievance to modern, targeted strategy.
Here's where it gets really interesting then. They're trying to hand the patient a treatment plan for all those comorbidities we talked about.
That's the goal.
It's an incredibly ambitious scope.
It really is.
So, to summarize the journey we've taken today, we've mapped the architecture of the 99% perspective. We've explored the economic mechanisms connecting massive geopolitical deficit spending to the suffocation of local business capital.
Right.
We've unpacked the structural double whammy facing marginalized communities as institutional diversity ladders are pulled up just as AI drops the floor out from under cognitive labor.
The new economic exclusion.
Exactly. And we've examined how the total collapse of the financial safety net has turned high-interest debt into a systemic requirement for survival, trapping buyers and renters alike.
And the connective tissue pulling all these mechanisms together remains that vital question from the beginning.
Yeah.
When you see the GDP rising, when you read headlines about economic growth, this blueprint demands that you look past the aggregate dashboard indicators. You must interrogate the mechanics of that growth and ask, who is actually capturing the capital and who is being left to navigate the collapsing safety nets?
It forces a ruthless examination of your own economic reality.
It absolutely does.
And as we wrap up our analysis of this framework, I wanted to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over something that builds directly on the author's warning about the future of capital and technology.
Okay.
The blueprint argues that the new American dream requires securing hard ownership and physical land just to achieve basic economic independence from automation, right?
Right.
But look at the trajectory of the modern market. What happens to the generations entering the workforce right now who are living in an economy actively designed to eliminate ownership entirely?
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
Think about it. Everything is shifting to a rental model. Your software is a monthly subscription. Your entertainment is licensed from a cloud you don't control. Car features are locked behind paywalls.
Literally paying to use your own heated seats.
Exactly. And Wall Street hedge funds are systematically buying up single-family neighborhoods to convert them into permanent, high-yield rental grids. If the fundamental conclusion of this blueprint is that the only way to survive the AI revolution is to own tangible assets, what is the ultimate fate of the 99% in a world that is desperately, systematically trying to turn them into permanent subscribers?
That is the question, isn't it?
It's definitely something to think about the next time you look at a monthly bill. Thank you for joining us as we mapped out this blueprint. Keep questioning the systems and the mechanisms around you, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.